You know, Iowa voters are not the only ones that we should be watching. This was big over the weekend. Taiwan held its presidential and parliamentary elections, and China none too pleased with the results because the winner was once again from the Democratic Progressive Party that now stays in power. Lai Ching-te, favoring independence from mainland China, winning the presidential election. Now, China had warned beforehand that electing Lai would bring the countries closer to war. So with that as a backdrop, let's talk to former Congressman, director of the Waaba Institute for Strategic Competition, Mark Kennedy, joins us right now once again on the program. It's good to see you again, sir. What does this win mean? It's the same party, right, that stays in power, but they don't keep control of the parliament.
Yeah, it's the same party, but it's 3 elections in a row. You know how hard that is. Yeah. And this really sends a message to China that the Taiwanese voters are not going to be intimidated by all the efforts that China has done to try to steer them away from the DPP. The party of the president did not win the legislature by a very narrow margin. So that's a bit of a concern, but that was really expected. So there may be some issues with pushing his agenda forward, but I think you're going to still see more of the same from Taiwan, which was not what China had hoped for.
What about this issue of this bringing us closer to war? I mean, that would be the U.S. interest in all of this. Is that a little over the top or something that we should be looking at seriously? Where do things stand right now, do you think?
Well, I think we have to take it very seriously. China has said that they won't go on forever waiting for Taiwan to decide that they want to re-embrace China, as they would say it. But I don't know that this necessarily sparks it as the move that will make us go to war. We have to be worried about that. I think part of the reason what we were looking for was to continue to work with Taiwan to build up their own defenses so that it would deter such aggression. But it is a concern.
Let me put up on the screen the quote from Xi Jinping, the leader in China, about that very subject. And here is what he said on the president-elect. He said President Lai would continue to follow the evil path of provoking independence, taking Taiwan ever further away from peace and prosperity and ever closer to war and decline. Is it clear 100% how the United States would respond if there was a invasion by China of Taiwan? Do we know?
We do not know. We have a policy of strategic ambiguity. President Biden has said several times that we would come to their defense, but then his staff has sort of walked those statements back. Yeah. We don't know who's going to be president in the future and what actions they will take. So this is all part of a game of deterrence, trying to deter China from taking that step. And some argue that we should end that strategic ambiguity and that would be a better path to deterring China. Yeah. But many others would say our policy of strategic ambiguity has worked for decades and that we should stick with it.
Yeah, it's a kind of a diplomatic game that we play here where sometimes you say, well, when you're in these when you make statements that are clearly in diplomatic language, you kind of know what's meant by it. But that's why I asked the question, in this case, do we? Maybe with this administration, would we bet on the fact that President Biden would deploy U.S. troops in Taiwan if there was an invasion there, or you're not willing to say that? I mean, you know this region pretty well and looked at it for a long time.
Well, if he said it 4 times, you would think that he would be inclined to do so. But we don't know what approach it would be and how clear it would be. If it was a clear attack that hit some of our bases in Japan, I would guess it's going to be a pretty likelihood that America is going to respond. If they go towards putting a quarantine around the island, if they take just some small islands that are part of Taiwan right near China, would we respond? So the ways that they could move at Taiwan to try to bring them closer are varied. And so I don't think it's easy to predict the response. But clearly, President Biden has made it clear in 4 statements that it is his intent, that America would be responding in support of Taiwan.
Right, when he's speaking in his own words.
I don't think the American people really understand how important Taiwan is as part of the first island chain, as a symbol of democracy, as a source of source of chips. So there's many other reasons why we can't really afford to turn our back Taiwan.
All right, let me bring that up as a point. We have we've been mentioning Decision Desk HQs, our partners in polling, and the data tonight in Iowa. But this polling has nothing to do with Iowa. The biggest foreign conflicts when it comes to national security, they polled, and Israel-Hamas, the war there was 28%, Russia-Ukraine war 21%. Possible war between China and Taiwan is also at 28%. But I think your point is that the actual concern, if this was to happen, is much, much higher than that.
Well, I think also, if you look at both the conflicts going on in Israel and Hamas and with Ukraine and Russia, we've made it clear that we don't intend to put U.S. troops at harm's risk there. If the U.S. were to engage in Taiwan, and it's hard to conceive of how Taiwan would be successful alone without the support of U.S. and its allies, that would put U.S. Men and women in harm's way. And so that's, I think, part of what's fueling it being a higher percentage as a possible conflict than the other two current actual conflicts.
Right, which are actually going on. All right. Thanks so much for watching. Just go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.